I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Croeso, and welcome to Tales for Wales, the pod that never fails to divide the true pod listeners and the little social media clippers to create a bastion of Welsh history in the depths of the pod country and to be aggy as fuck in the pub. If you're not from round here...
You're not round here, you bastards.
I only include that last bit because when we went to Pembroke, they were pretty aggy with us.
Yeah. I was thinking that we're going to do another road trip soon, aren't we? We did the Lanska line. I tried to think where we could do it, but I did like the agginess of Pembrokeshire. I was thinking Tenby we could do, because Tenby's got like a really nice like wall around it, but it is quite, not to be, it's a bit commercial. It's quite a busy place, isn't it?
It's tourist trap.
Yeah, man. Have you ever been there in the summertime? It is fucking
I have.
hellish.
It's hectic. It's I don't mind going to Tenby. I like it, especially if we went a little bit off season. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, and we would do. I think. Well, actually, we're going June. Our next holiday, isn't it? Our next holiday. Our next road trip.
Holiday. Very much is a holiday.
It's an holiday.
Just me and you drinking for like 2 days straight. It's fantastic.
It is so good, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
generally, it's
so
some of the absolute best time of
I
my life.
always love it on the second day because we would take it too hard the first day all the time. We always have to drag ourselves to do the pod stuff.
The actual
literally
pod
there
stuff.
for.
Yeah. And also, what's good is last time the audio turned out well because we've finally got our fucking heads together.
Our shit together,
and we can actually record, which is such a bonus, because when we did it before and it turned out dog shit, it was like,
so disappointing.
Yeah,
I think what's so frustrating with the audio, it's such a fickle mistress, because the times we did it before, we do a test one, listen to it.
Yeah,
sounds good to
fine.
me.
Yeah, I know.
So we just crack on, and then
but we've done
that first 5 minutes goes past and so
we've done like 3. I think we've done like 4 like road trippy episodes, and only one. The one we did at Pembroke, which was a Patreon and like a main feed, actually turned out okay. The other ones
like
were
good audio,
were generally unusable.
Well, and the other ones we had to clip cut out so much good stuff because you just could not fucking hear us.
We did like a castle walk, and then in the pub. Oh, anyway, let's get the energy.
Let's
back
not dwell.
We've just done an episode. Jack just did a really good episode, but then we spent the last 20 minutes debriefing and chatting. Yeah, so we need to get the energy back up, and we'll do that by. I wish we could shock ourselves with energy, because if you go onto our Patreon, you can get the shock video we did. I won't push it too hard, because we did last episode, we pushed it quite hard, but we would recommend you get on there. It's like £5 a month. You get 2 bonus episodes per month, plus you get access to the latest video we did, which was this electric quiz one, which was really fun. And the next one we're going to do is some kind of boozy vodka roulette, some kind of like roulette-based Welsh booze game.
We'll iron that out. But basically, we've got a couple of ideas.
I can't quite remember what it was.
A couple of irons in the fire, haven't we? And we're not sure which one to do next. But there's a few good ones.
We've got to film it soon. We need to get that one
soon. Yeah, get that locked in. But basically, I know we keep plugging this bloody shocking quiz, but it generally is some good content, and even watching my dumb face in it, I was like, this is quite funny. So.
And we asked the Patreon members to pick what the next was going to be. So I'm pretty sure the next one we're going to do was like a Welsh history booze tour, but we're going to make it
booze through the ages or something, wasn't it?
Yeah,
if I remember
but we did say we were going to make it like kind of horrible by making us do shots, which is quite like drunk history, officially drunk history. Do you want to do us your little horrible jizz story then? Seeing as
I was going to say, don't try and glaze over the jizz. story,
don't say glaze as well. That's the last.
Basically, okay, it's short and sweet. All right, don't worry, it's not going to take too long. But I went for a drink with our mate Josh not too long ago. Right, a couple of shandies. I was driving, right, so it wasn't a biggie. Anyway, went down to his new local. It's called, what is it called? The locals call it the Billy. I think it's called like the King William or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
Where's that too?
It's not far from, the Lidl in Barry.
Oh, yeah.
It's not too far. We had to walk about 15 minutes from Josh's place there. Anyway, not bad pub. It's a bit like rough and ready, but I quite like that in a bar.
Yeah, me.
So we went there. They had a nice little beer garden. It was a nice sunny day. We sat at the back, a couple of shandies and all that. Anyway, getting a bit later in the night, we were obviously not too smashed because we were all in the shandies and whatever.
Yeah.
But I went into the bar, last like sort of drink before we set off now. And there's a few people that have been there since like, you know, work's finished and like a few like leery older blokes. And there was this young girl sort of next to me coming up. I think I've overheard them speaking. I think they're all teachers or something, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, they were like, "Oh, can we have some tequila rosé?" Oh, he loves it. I do. I loves it. Oh,
I do fucking love it.
I do fucking love it. Anyway, and then this other woman next to me who was very much not young, she was like,
a hag, a bar hag.
A hag, if you might know, a witch of the bar, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, and she was going, "Oh, Lev, you want to try this, whatever, like, it was called like pineapple milk or something fucking weird like that. Basically, tequila rosé, but pineapple flavored. She went, "Have a try that, Lev." She did it, and as she put it down, the barman maid poured it. The hag was like, "Oh, I know what it looks like, but trust me, it's way better than that." And it's like, because it's like this white liquid.
Yeah,
anyway.
white. Yeah.
She sculled it down. She went, "Oh, I'll have another one, please, and some for us." Blah blah blah. Ha ha. They're all having a great time. I'm just waiting for.
You sound really bitter. You sound.
Well, I'm just
really
waiting for because I was only on shandy. I was like, "Oh, I could be having the fucking tequila pineapple over the fucking."
We have the jizz shot.
I could have a jizz shot. Anyway, she poured the barmaid poured a few more for her and her friends like that. They all come out and she was like, "Oh, have this. This lady just told us to have it. Like, oh, it's lush. It is lush. Ready to go." And before they did it, the girl, the woman, the hag, the bar hag, blurted out. She went, "It's much better than cum." And I was like, "Ugh." And then at this point, I decided, I don't know why I decided to join into the fray, but I went like,
"Oh, you joined in? You're not."
I just said, they wouldn't sell very much if it didn't, would they?
Yeah.
Like, and then the bar, I know, but you know,
you should have been banned for that.
Takes better
You're
than
the
cum.
bar.
Hang on. So she said, "Tastes better than cum." I said, "I doubt they sell much if it didn't." And then the barman, like, who wasn't even involved in this thing, he looked me dead in the eye. He went, "Wouldn't sell any at all." And it was just like,
you're all three of you.
I know,
hag,
and I wasn't
you,
proud of what I did.
What's the equivalent of a bar hag?
The warlock.
But the old
sad shandy
man.
drinker.
The shandy. Yeah.
The shandy boy. But it was. But it was like when he said, "Wouldn't sell any at all." I was like, "That's the joke, mate. That was the joke."
It's in Caddixton, the pub, isn't it?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's in Caddy.
Caddy's quite rough and ready, man.
Yeah, it is rough and ready. I quite like the pub though. Apart from the fucking bar staff that feel the need to absolutely hammer your joke into the ground.
I really want you to come over here, right? And because last time we came over, it was me, you, our wives, and it was like we had a really fun night. But we just stayed in the house, didn't we? We just we boozed in the house. We did food. We did the quiz and all that malarkey. I really want to take you to two of the pubs by here. Like I don't think I have a local because it's about a 25-minute walk, and to me, that's beyond
too
the
far,
local.
really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the same. My local is technically the Heathcock, just down the road from me, but that's a 20-minute walk. It's not local enough for me to consider it a local. Yeah,
exactly. But there's one. The one is the Six Bells, which is actually really nice, and it's opposite Coity Castle, so it's like a banging pub, and it's like it's not thatched roof, but it's got like the Jacobean black and white exposed beams on the outside.
I love that shit.
I love that shit. And then the other one is like a Brewers Fair pub on a roundabout opposite like a little collection of like Greg's, Pizza Hut, Domino's.
I like that for very different reasons, but equally live.
Yeah. So I want to show you. I want to take us to both of them because they are like they're the two closest and they're such different vibes. But I really want us to have a proper pub day in Bridgend together. So I think maybe after this call, let's lock that shit.
Let's lock it in.
Yeah. So your Dirty story.
That was my Dirty Jizz story, mate. Yeah, that's the thing.
I don't know, because I don't think I got too much regaly one. Other than, do you know, like I'm quite neurotic and like quite an anxious chap. There was a period where I'm so unwell in my brain that it was a couple of weeks ago, I was laughing so much on Instagram Reels. They were making me howl and I was having such a good time. I was like, I was like crying laughing. I I then had a mad panic thinking it was my brain releasing chemicals because I was about to die, and they wanted my last moments in life to be full of euphoric and intense.
Can't just enjoy a good reel.
No, I then had a panic attack. I was like, "Oh fuck, I'm going to die because I'm such
triggered
good time."
a panic attack because you were just having too much of a good time.
Because I shouldn't have been having that much fun watching fucking reels. It was like, no way should they be that
This idea
funny.
in your brain's going, it can't be that funny. It cannot be that funny.
It cannot be that funny. I must be dying, and my brain must be doing
It
like
must just be
releasing
death
because you know, like
release
people
chemicals.
say, some people say before you die, you get like this like euphoric sense of,
feeling. Like, yeah,
I was like, "Fuck me, I feel so good. I'm going to die." I didn't think that sums up.
What does it say
my
about your
neuroses.
psyche when you're like, "I'm not allowed something this good.
I can't be
must
that
come
happy
with
or
a
I'll
price."
fucking die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm an ill chap. We're on the beers. We haven't mentioned what beers we're on. I'm on a Heineken 0.0.
You're on the Zeros. I'm on the Carlsbergs, but I've got, of course, my little Cumby Shackhead on top of it as well.
And I'm also mixing it with I'm having a couple of sips of, I'm having a couple of pints of the Heine 0.0 and then having some Bumba rum, which is
I love
like
that.
an unbelievable
Two
good.
parts Heine Zero, one part Bumbu Rum.
Yeah, I don't mix them in the same cup, but I do.
No.
I have, once I finish one, I move on to the other. I dip back in.
That's a good way to use the non-alkies. I find, like, I normally
Yeah,
I tend to be real drink non-alky, real drink non-alky. If I'm going to try and stay pretty.
Yeah, and that way there, you do only have like 4 pints of actual beer, and you still feel like you got a bit of a buzz on. And if you're just drinking non-alky,
I've just got to trick myself into it. Otherwise, I'll just
well,
drink
if you're just having
yeah.
non-alkies, you know you're not getting any sort of real buzz from it, so you don't really,
Yeah, but it tricks you, doesn't it? And you still get a little bit of a buzz, but you think you keep drinking. It's not like you're stopping dead.
Right. It's all about stopping
right,
dead.
Enough of that now.
I'm going to stop this conversation dead and move on to today's episode, which was recommended to us by a few listeners and I think a Patreon member because they're from this part of the world. Sorry, I feel like I'm doing fifths, like I got a lisp. But yeah, this episode's all about the Lanska line. Which did you know much about it before?
I knew about it. I didn't realize what its name was. I didn't know it was called the Lanska line. But I did know about the kind of separation, the split. It's north and south, right?
Yeah. The Lanska is actually, I think it's a Norse word, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the Lanska line is a long recognised cultural and linguistic boundary in southwest Wales, most visible across Pembrokeshire and into Carmarthenshire. It separates a historically English-speaking south with a Welsh-speaking north, but it's not and has never been like a fixed or official border. So, some people will say, oh, the line starts here. Others will say it doesn't. But it's better to be understood as like a shifting zone where language, identity, landscape patterns, they change over time. So there's kind of like a sea, like a tide coming in and out. Sometimes it'll kind of move around. Geographically, the line is usually described as running from St. Bride's Bay inland across Pembrokeshire. And a common cited rule of thumb places Fishguard to the Welsh-speaking north and Tenby to the English-speaking south. Though this is a bit of an oversimplification and it's not really precise. But before the Norman conquest, the majority of what is now Pembrokeshire was Welsh-speaking. The origins of the Lanska line in the aftermath of the Norman conquest of England. So from the 11th century, Norman lords pushed into southwest Wales and then they established control, which we call the Marshlands, which then incorporated parts of South Pembrokeshire. What's really important here is that they didn't... sorry, just dying a little bit. What's important or like quite crucial is they didn't just conquer it, they settled it. So like when Edward I conquered Wales, he then even though he added English administration, it was still ruled by Welsh people. And what happened here though, they didn't just conquer it and then move out. They settled it specifically with English settlers along with Flemish settlers, and I'll talk about the Flemish more in a second. Well, actually, talk about them now. They were likely relocated.
Literally a second, yeah.
The Flemish were relocated because in the early 12th century, there was like political and environmental upheaval in Flanders, where the Flemish come from. So they then moved over. So Flanders, Hadley ho, neighboury no.
I was going to do, come out, you black and tans, come fight me like a man.
So you're going to play for you what medals down in
Flanders.
But Flanders, the place, suffered greatly for a huge amount of storms. So it's a coastal place in 1106, and this This is historian Samuel Lewis. He wrote that during a tremendous storm on the coast of Flanders, the sandhills and the embankments were in many places carried away and the sea inundated a large tract of the country. So it flooded and lost a lot of the land. So a lot of the
salt water as well. They'll just kill all the fucking plant life.
The plants, all that. And also like the sand dunes, all that stuff, they lost a lot of actual land because this storm blew it all away and the sea came in. And this led to a huge amount of Flemish seeking asylum in England, where they were welcomed by Henry I. They settled in various colonies across England, but soon, Samuel Lewis, that guy I mentioned, he wrote, they became odious to the native population, so the English were fucking sick of the Flemish. And then Henry I moved all the Flemish, or lots of the Flemish, to the remote farming settlement in the Cantrev, a district of Ross in Pembrokeshire.
That kind of makes sense, because the Flemish are often in battles against the Welsh as well, along with the English, aren't they? That kind of makes a bit of sense. Yeah,
so when Glyndŵr wins his first battle, he beats the Flemish when he's on the hill ponies. But I read a lot of this from... I'll do the quotes of the place. I should say that. So the source I got it from was A History of Wales by John Davis, The Making of Modern Wales by Glanmor Williams. There's some a historical atlas of Wales by William Rees, and then some BBC articles which come from the collection of National Library of Wales. But I read an article of the BBC that starts with about the Flemish, and it's like, as in, it's talking about the Leinster line in this period. It goes, and the title has like asylum seekers seeking refuge in Wales. And then it goes on to give like a detailed account of Flemish colonialists in Wales. But it really made me laugh that even covering a story that's 1,000 years old, it has to start with like a divisionist journalism.
That absolute hurricane.
It's like we're talking about people I don't even think exist anymore. And it's still like bloody immigrants coming over here.
At the time, there was like Welsh people going, small boats every day we're getting, for fuck's sake.
Except these boats were big and wooden.
Yeah, big boats. Imagine how bad it was with big boats, right? Full of big Flemish boys.
Yeah. This systematic planting of Flemish settlers by Henry I and later Henry II had huge significant consequences for the people of South Pembrokeshire. This geography professor, Harold Carter, he looked at the effects and he said, if you look at the Bruta Tywysogion, the Chronicle of Welsh Princes, it records a certain folk of strange origins and customs occupying the whole Cantrev of Ross, the estuary of the River Cleddau, and drove away all the inhabitants of the land. In a way, you could almost call it a process of ethnic cleansing. What's nuts is this borderline between the natives who were in the north and the Flemish. They had to build a line of 50 castles and strongholds. The Normans and the Flemish built this to protect South Pembrokeshire from the indigenous Welsh. So in this small corridor...
We are fucking fuming, so you best get some castles down
Well, they did 50 castles in like a line because...
That is a lot.
Yeah, and the Welsh have been forced into the hilly, less agriculturally sound part of the
classic.
North.
Yeah. I know you guys were here first, but we'll get the good land.
And I'll talk more about the land in a bit. But it's I'll just talk about these castles. So this frontier of castles had to be built, now known as the Leinster Line, from an Old Norse word for divide. So Leinster means to divide, and it stretched from like Newgale on the west coast to Amroth on the southeast coast. There's just like a literal line of castles. 2/3 of the fortifications were earthworks, and then the final third were like stone castles that were proper
strongholds.
The castle of Haverfordwest was built by the Flemish leader Tancred soon after the Flemish arrived, and that's still a castle you see today. Under its protection, a settlement developed and the foundations were laid for a modern market town and commercial centre. So Haverfordwest became this really important Flemish centre. The village of Wiston, 5 miles northeast of Haverfordwest, derived from a name from another Fleming, Lord Wizo Flandrennis, and that's spelled W-I-Z-O, Wizo, and then Flandrennis, which probably means Flanders.
You're a Wizo, Harry.
You're a Wizo, Flanders. He established a castle there as well. And then another place, Letterston, was a settlement of a suitably nicknamed Lettered Little King, which means Little King, so Lettered the Little King. Temby, or Dimbych Pysgod in Welsh. Do you know what it means in what the Welsh version means in English? Dimbych Pysgod.
No, I know Pysgod is obviously fish.
Yeah,
that one. Well, I don't know what Dimbych is now.
So Dean often means like fortress, and Bych is like a translation of like Bach. So it's like little fortress of the fish. So Dimbych Pysgod means little fortress of the fish. And it's because the way it coves round, it protects the fish in the like that hook that kind of comes out.
I like it.
Anyway, Tenby on the southeast coast of Pembrokeshire grew in the 12th century when surrounding walls, a castle and a church were erected for the convenience of the Flemish colonists. The Flemish were experts in woolen trade and soon flourished in the area. And like I mentioned, the Flemish occupied far more productive farming land in Pembrokeshire, south of the Lanska Line, in the lowland areas. Here, the land was really fertile and was warmed by a Gulf Stream, often enjoying Indian summers, mild winters, and early springs. Hence why Tenby is such a hot spot for holidaymakers.
Yeah,
now,
it's almost like a microclimate. It's a bit like Cornwall.
Yeah. Crops were ready 2 weeks before those in the north of the county, where the terrain was much more mountainous. And this created something unusual, a deliberate colonial enclave within Wales. So they got like the best of the land and only across the border, literally this kind of brand new border. And it was, we'll talk more about it in a bit, but this was a small England within Wales. So South Pembrokeshire developed as an area tied closely to Norman and later English systems. So it had, like, linguistically, economically, and politically very much aligned with England and the Normans.
Was it the same with, like, the law system as well? Did they practice English law as opposed to the Welsh law and stuff? Yeah.
At times they did, yeah. Whereas the area's north retained a much stronger continuity with Welsh language and culture, and that divide then becomes self-reinforcing. So in the south, settlement was organised and village-based, with relatively regular field systems, often associated with Norman influence, whereas in the north, settlement remained more dispersed, so like irregular field patterns typical of earlier Welsh landholding, where like you kind of move around to where it works best. And then over generations, language followed these patterns, where English dominated the south and Welsh persisted in the north. And then this influx of the Flemings into South Pembrokeshire was so great that the Welsh language was eradicated, and Flemish gradually gave way to English as the dominant language. However, there's a a very specific dialect spoken here with a strong and distinctive accent, and it had like a large vocabulary of words not commonly found elsewhere. In 1913, some dork named P.V. Harris wrote, "In many ways, the dialect of South Pembrokeshire is the most fascinating in Britain, and owing to the country's remoteness, perhaps the least adulterated in years. Many of the words are pre-Chaucerian, Chaucer, that guy.
Yeah.
So many of the words are pre-Chaucerian, which have fallen into disuse elsewhere, and some of the familiar words still have their earlier pronunciations. So, for example, in the 1930s, people from the south part of Lanska wouldn't say butcher, they'd say budger. And instead of the bat, they'd call it a catamouse, and instead of a tadpole, a catchpole. And instead of icicles, frost candles, and instead of a puffin, they call it a sea parrot. I don't know how true that is to today, but in the 1930s, that's how they still referred to things.
What was that guy's name?
P.V. Harris.
So like Virgin Harris,
Pussy Virgin Harris, yeah. That's exactly what he is. And then these distinctive qualities of the English spoken in South Pembrokeshire were noted by a guy called George Owen, who's a Welsh antiquarian, author, and naturalist. In 1603, so this is fucking ages ago. Let me have a gulp of this.
Glug it down, my friend.
And this is written in Chaucerian language. So it's all like, instead of part, it's spelled with an E at the end. But it says, "The most part of the country speaketh English in this yount now use of Welsh. The names of the people are mere English etchy family followings, the English fashion and surnames. Their buildings are English, like in towns, reddies, and villages, and not in several and lone houses. Their diet is of the English people, whose uses of the common food is beef. The reasons and also for these most ancient gentlemen came thither out of England. Might Viv Fittle procure the name of Little England beyond Wales." What that nonsense is saying is people, it's even in the 1600s,
people noticed it was
people noticed, yeah. They ate beef, which Welsh people didn't eat as much. We're more lamb and like
eating beef. Oh,
yeah, well, beef was mega expensive, so Welsh people couldn't really afford it. They named different surnames to how we have in the rest of Wales. And even then, he said, "Might very fittle procure the name Little England beyond Wales." So by at least the 16th century, the southern area had now been called Little England beyond Wales.
Got its reputation, yeah.
Yeah, and this wasn't just about language. It reflected a broader sense that the region was culturally distinct from the rest of Wales. What made the Lanska Line particularly interesting is how visible it once was on the ground. So crossing it meant notable shifts in. So the minute you go over the border, sometimes, say if you go between Czech Republic and Bosnia, I think they're next to each other, but you might not notice straight away. because the land looks very similar. Back in the day here, the structure and the names of the settlements change instantly. The field shapes and the farming layout changes instantly. Even local identity and custom, language, that all changes within an instant.
There's also a big giveaway. You're probably going past a few castles as well. Like, when you step over the line. But
The divide in language and custom in Pembrokeshire that the Lanska line represented sort of has remained to today. Previously, intermarriage between the two cultures had been discouraged as language wasn't the only difference. There's a writer from the area called Roy Lewis. He comments on the religious factors. He says, early in my lifetime, there was no intermingling of North and South. This was mainly due to religion, as those from the North were non-conformists, like much of Wales, and those from the South were mainly Catholic or Anglican. So you wouldn't get involved in a down below, is how the Welsh would describe the those below the line.
I think that's a very Welsh trait, that to be like, oh, them down there. I remember in like my local pub growing up, I think I've told you about this before. It was in it was called the King's Cups when I was growing up. It's been the Horseshoes for most of it. There was a bar and the lounge area, and everyone in the bar, like everyone in that entire pub was scumbags, right, including myself. But everyone would refer to the people down in the lounge. They go, "Oh, it's a fucking pond life down there. We don't drink down there." And they wouldn't be caught dead down the lounge, even though it's like they're all the same kettle of
pub.
fish.
That said, it wasn't absolute. So there was always movement, trade, intermarriage in some areas, like in the lower, like people who weren't as kind of high up, and the boundary itself shifted over time. It's better thought as like a gradient rather than a hard line. And then from the early modern period onwards, and especially in the 19th and 20th century, the sharpness of the divide began to soften. This is because things like increased mobility, state education, and wider use of English reduced the linguistic contrasts. South Pembrokeshire has become a popular place to relocate to from other parts of the UK, and this fresh wave of people also softened the cultural divide. They're not aware of like any factions, so like there's no loyalties to either side, and when that happens, it dilutes it between the two because they're like, well, what do you mean you're all fucking the same county? Today, the Lanska line is less obvious in everyday use, but it still shows up in place names, dialect traces, and local identity. Historians value the Lanska line because it's a clear example of how medieval conquest and settlement can shape cultural geography for centuries. Few places in Britain show such a long-lasting and spatially visible divide rooted in the Norman period.
I was going to say, is there like other examples of this? Because it's
not
like,
really.
It's quite unique, isn't it?
Yeah. There's like Aberystwyth was a town built by Edward I. There's places where the English built, but they kind of were put by Welsh people.
Like you said, it's the difference between building something and settling something, isn't it? Like you said, that they were there to stay, sort of thing.
I also got a really boring fact. The oldest chimney in Wales was a Flemish chimney, and it was down in Cadw near Tenby. And a Flemish chimney is made of like local limestone and built into the front wall of a cottage close to the door. They're like these tall and conical, like cone shaped, with a large round stack. Sometimes they're big enough, these chimneys, you can fit a chair and table inside them. And many of the chimneys remained long after the original building had been demolished. So if you Google it, you can see a couple, you can still visit.
If you're big into chimneys, you're probably big into Flanders then as
and
well.
I think I finally understand they're called Flemish because they're from Flanders.
So, I think we've struggled with that for about nigh on 3 years now, but we've got it. We got there in the end.
And I got some things to wrap it up, but it's kind of what I've said already. It's not. It's always porous and shifting. It's not an absolute line. It's still relevant today because it's still historical and cultural concept. You get it. It's a mad line.
Yeah,
it's
got
nuts.
it.
Doesn't really happen anywhere else in Britain, so it's really.
It's a line. It's not a line. It's culture. It's Wales. It's Flemland.
It's non-binary. It's an absolute non-binary.
It's an absolute trans border, right?
So it's a bit of a short one, but I think it's really interesting that this exists.
Very interesting, man. And I was really interested to learn the origin of the name as well, because I was like, Lanska line, that doesn't sound Welsh, doesn't sound English.
No.
So weird that they borrowed that from the Norse, considering it's to do with the English, the Welsh, and the Flemish. But
right, before any etymologist bastards or little dorks write in, the word Lanska comes from Anglo-Saxon and Norse terms, the sker being the Norse side of it to describe a clear, permanent boundary. I might have just omitted the Anglo-Saxon part, which is why it makes perfect sense why it's there. But it also has a Norse connotation with the word sker. So don't fucking start, all right? Love you, bye.
This is history, all right?
Yeah.
But no, that's cool. That the idea of like that 50-odd castles like across the line, like patrolling the borders. I do like that. It always warms my heart a little bit. I know us, the Welsh historically, we tend to win a couple of battles but lose wars. But I love that that sort of legacy is that people would be like, we got to keep such a fucking tight grip on these bastards that we got to build castles everywhere. Constantly. Otherwise they'll just rebel again.
Yeah.
So I quite like that we were such a feisty bunch that you got to build all these forts.
And even though we got the shit land, we got the shit farm thing, we still fucking still survive.
I know this is like a colonist 101, but it's so annoying. It's
know.
Oh, you've been here 1,000 years, you fuck off now up to the hills.
Yeah.
This lovely land is ours. Thank you.
It is ours. Well, if you got this far, please drop us a review, follow us on socials,
please.
And sign up to the Patreon if you'd like to. We love you very much. Bye.
Diolch, ta-ra.